Good morning, all. Does being autistic per se define you as vexatious? Well, in Florida it does, in a new twist on illegal segregation and exclusion of autistic people. Let's take a look. The Supreme Court of Florida issued this administrative order by the Chief Justice, signed by the Clerk of Court John Tomasino, on April 26, 2024. And in this order, the order states that the initial work group on Vexatious submitted its findings and recommendation to the Supreme Court dated June 15, 2022. The Supreme Court approved the recommendation. Among other things, the initial work group found that Florida's vexatious litigant law is too limited and recommended that the law be expanded to ensnare a broader population of people. Well, who are some of these people that it should be expanded to ensnare and slap a tremendously damaging label and stereotype with stigma plus? What people? What people do they want to label this way? Well, some individuals have a tendency to experience sensory stimuli more intensely than the average person. Thus, a minor nuisance to an average person would be portrayed as severe by such amplifiers and overperceivers. Again, this explanation is consistent with previous descriptions of hyper-litigious litigants who often misinterpret the actions of others and pursue litigation far longer than a situation warrants. And where was that published? In this article here. The article, I found this article posted on the Florida State Court's website. So this article is saying that individuals with oversensory impairments who might so-called misinterpret and be misunderstood are vexatious. That's what it says. What kind of people have sensory oversensitivity to stimuli, get complex PTSD from being subjected to it, and feel pain from it when it's inflicted on them? Well, the same Florida courts posted Title II America with Disabilities Act guidelines on their same website as that article that says persons with autism have such symptoms which may include either an underreaction or overreaction to sensory stimuli. That's in Appendix B of the Florida Court's Title II Americans with Disabilities Act guidelines. So, it's autistic people with an autism spectrum disorder who have oversensitivity to sensory stimuli who are vexatious. Basically, per se, vexatious, according to the Florida State Courts. Isn't that pretty outrageous? I mean, how are they getting away with this? Where's the U.S. Department of Justice? The Florida State Court system is relying on extraordinarily outdated 1984 knowledge of autistic people who have autism spectrum disorders. But autistic people do have oversensory crisis, and it is a crisis. And atypical responses to sensory stimuli are a new diagnostic criterion in the DSM V for diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder. And that is according to the most recent version of the DSM V. In sum, sensory reactivity differences are a new diagnostic criterion for autism spectrum individuals under the DSM V 2013, which occur across multiple sensory domains and are characterized by hyperactivity, overresponsivity, or hypoactivity to the sensory stimuli. And that is here. Now, if you lived in the world in 1984, you might still believe only children get autism. But we live in 2024, and it's very clear that autistic people who are children grow up to be autistic adults. And Autism Speak says there are sensory issues common in individuals with autism. That includes children and adults. Might have sensitivities to sight, sound, smells, taste, touch, balance, awareness of body position and movement, awareness of internal body cues and sensations, among others. These sensory issues can be incredibly physically and emotionally draining for an autistic person and can leave the person feeling too exhausted to do other important tasks. Autism Speaks also says accommodations for sensory issues are supposed to be provided. This is Autism Speaks here. Furthermore, there's another recent study that was brought to my attention thanks to Morgan Foley, and it is this one. Autism and PTSD are vulnerably linked. Now, what is totally inexcusable about the Florida State Courts is that when they posted this article describing the oversensory diagnostic criteria of a person with an autism spectrum disorder to their website and equated them with being a vexatious, they also did this. They made a hypothesis that it was factitious disordered behaviors. And that was in this article here, posted to the Florida State Court's website, in with their vexatious materials. So I'm autistic. I have an autism spectrum diagnosis from the University of South Florida. So what does that mean? What does that mean? That the Florida courts are posting this article that's basically saying if I exhibit an autism spectrum disorder diagnostic criteria trait of being oversensitive to sensory stimuli, that means I'm vexatious, and it also means a hypothesis of a factitious disordered behavior. What does that mean? Well, that means under the definition in Title II of the American with Disabilities Act, they are regarding me as having such an impairment, being the hypothesis of factitious disordered behavior, a misdiagnosis, because I'm diagnosed as autistic. I have a diagnosis of an autism spectrum disorder. And what does this mean? What is Black's Law Dictionary's definition of vexatious? You're just going to take autistic people in the Florida courts and you're going to label them vexatious because they they hate us. They don't like us. They don't want us in their courts. Heaven forbid that they would ever give an autistic person a full, fair, and impartial hearing or trial. Heaven forbid they would educate themselves about what is an autism spectrum disorder. What does an autistic person look like? Oh, no, they don't need any training. That's what they said through their lawyer, the Attorney General of the state of Florida, when they were sued in the Petrano v. Polston case. They don't need any training. So they're just going to label autistic people basically per se vexatious. What is the definition of vexatious? Well, vexatious is defined as being without reasonable cause or excuse, harassing, annoying. I get it. Neurotypical people very frequently, especially if they don't have any education or experience or autism awareness about autistic people, they are very likely to be annoyed, bothered, find autistic people to be harassing and annoying. They're annoying. Why? Because they're different. They are different. They are neurodiverse. And this definition is found in a Nova Law Review article by Deborah Nevils that's cited in the Florida Court's Vexatious Litigant Materials that says, basically, is by innuendo saying that autistic people have courtroom capers. And that's where it is, and this can be found on the internet. Now, it's really amazing to me that any lawyer or person could say this kind of inflammatory and irreparably prejudicial stuff about someone who is autistic. Courtroom capers? So you got to get rid of these autistic people out of the courtroom because, we don't like them. But instead, she's been praised by the vexatious materials of the Florida courts. That labeling autistic people as vexatious based on the diagnostic criteria of an autism spectrum disorder, the sensory oversensitivity to stimuli, that it is very damaging and prejudicial is nowhere more evident than what the Fourth Florida District Court of Appeal had to say in Smith v. Fisher here. Where there's smoke, there's fire. Okay, so that justifies basically putting autistic people on the so-called separate but not equal court system track in the Florida courts with stigma, prejudice. It can be picked up in background checks when you try to get a job, rent an apartment, get credit. Say, aren't autistic people like me vulnerable, disabled adults? I'm elderly too. I'm over the age of 65. So you've got this court system statute targeting autistic people for separate, unequal, and different treatment. Why? Because you as a court system in Florida, you're not getting any autism educational training. You don't have any autistic experience. You're relying on 1984 knowledge. You're not even listening to actually autistic people. What's that about? I mean, isn't the law the learned profession? Well, they say it is, but is it? And in this dissertation, 2023, by Sarah Harper, done at the University of South Florida, right here, that studied the first task force's report and Florida's statute aimed at autistic people for their sensory oversensitivity. The dissertation observed that cases brought by a difficult litigant, that's the autistic litigants, may have merit occasionally. And another one saying they have merit. In fact, in all of these vexatious litigant materials, within them, you'll even find a judge comment that said, well, you know, one judge may see the person's case as having a merit. About 50% of the judges, well, another 50% of the judges might say it's frivolous and vexatious. So, well, what's wrong with all of this? What's wrong with all of this is that the Attorney General regulations implementing Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act says a public entity such as the state of Florida, the Florida Supreme Court, the Florida Legislature, the clerk of the Florida Supreme Court, as an official, shall administer services, programs, and activities in the most integrated setting appropriate to the needs of qualified individuals with disabilities. That is the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II, anti-segregation. In sum, the mislabeled Vexatious statute is in reality an autistic segregation statute to ensure that autistic people are excluded out of the Florida court system. It's done on an arbitrary and capricious number of cases lost in the face of the Florida state courts cannot and are not accommodating autistic people's blanket extra time needs under Title II of the ADA. And that was even stated in an ADA grievance response I received from the ADA grievance team headed by former Chief Judge of the Florida 2nd District Court of Appeal, the Honorable Chris Altenburn. And so autistic people annoy these homogeneously neurotypical majority in the Florida state courts. The homogeneous neurotypical majority in the Florida state courts is not undertaking any mandatory specific autistic training. They don't have any autism experience. They perceive autistic people as different. They marginalize and trivialize the oversensory sensitivity to stimuli that is painful to autistic people and causes complex PTSD. They basically say that's frivolous and it's not real. So autistic people are getting treated differently. And they admit, first they say in the Neville's article that there's no problem doing this to autistic people because they could do this because the cases are frivolous, but then they're later admitting in their first task force report and in the research dissertation by Harper that, yeah, there's claims that are meritorious. These are good cases, but we don't like the autistic litigants, and that is evident from the Florida court's article it posted on its website. So in sum, autistic people in Florida are being targeted to be excluded from the Florida court system. They're being targeted on the basis of a diagnostic criterion of autism, sensory sensitivity, stated in the DSM V. They are not updating themselves in the Florida court system. They're purposely using outdated 1984 information. And the Chief Justice has issued this order and formed a second task force to make more recommendations, expand the number of people in this autistic segregated court system track. And so under this administrative order here, there's a second work group, and those are these people here. They're serving on a second work group here, and they are supposed to file, and signed by the Chief Justice. Were supposed to file their report and recommendations for how to expand the number of people on the court segregation list, the stigma plus one that destroys an autistic person's every opportunity in their life through these background checks. And it was supposed to be filed by September 6, 2024. So far, I can't find where it's filed. Okay? And here's the most glaring thing about this autism oppression. This Autism Segregation Statute and segregation program existing in the Florida state courts to exclude autistic people, that admits through all these materials that they're targeting good and valid cases of merit. Just what they don't like is the differences of autistic people and our behaviors that they don't understand. They're targeting us under this Autism Segregation Statute to expand it. And this Honorable Chief Justice Carlos G. Muniz, he should be looking at both the initial and the second report, and he should be asking a couple questions. One, why are we targeting autistic people like me? And doesn't this violate Article 1, Section 2 of the Florida Constitution, particularly since autism includes physical disabilities? That's one. Two, doesn't creating a segregated court system like this violate the regulation implementing Title II of the ADA, 28 C.F.R., Section 35.130D? And three, why aren't any of my task force members doing any research or study or feedback by contacting the victims of this autism segregation statute about the impact, injuries, and damage it's causing in their lives once we do this to them? If you like my videos and you want to hear more videos on autism and what's happening to actually autistic adults, hit the notification, ring the bell, subscribe to my channel, and I'll be doing future videos. Thank you for watching.